you know, getting anything to happen in housing is complex and takes time. So the Housing Infrastructure Fund was announced in the latter part of last year. Initial discussions with the councils indicated they didn't have well-prepared projects, although you might have thought they did. So there's been intensive negotiation with them in the early part of this year, and that'll around the financing as well as the actual projects. So it's been a very constructive discussion about how to expand the sort of sources of finance for councils and for central government, actually, as well as everyone getting a much better understanding of what roads and pipes are actually required to bring forward housing supply, and that's turning, you know, high-level plans into construction projects. So I would expect that as those negotiations are completed for a $1 billion fund, that there'll be announcements about what the projects actually are.
Would you expect some sort of public-private partnership or some sort of hybrid equity vehicles to be announced at the same time as the HIF?
Well, look, I wouldn't want to prejudge what will be announced, but the whole discussion about how to finance these things sooner than was expected, dealing with the council debt limits, dealing with the way central government accounting works, has been a big part of the discussion. And for New Zealand, I have to say, it's pretty challenging because we don't have a history of doing this outside of the mainstream PPPs. But I think it's great that it's now become publicly acceptable to look at a range of sources of finance. And as you look into the future with the size of the infrastructure demands, which will include, you know, once our urban areas get round to focusing on water quality, they're going to find their water systems need significant investment, as well as the ongoing housing demand. This is a great way to work through the nuts and bolts of how council and central government can work together to improve the financing mechanisms. Now, because it's relatively new, I wouldn't raise too many expectations about the next few months, but certainly there's been, the indications I've seen is an awful lot learned by both central and local government about how some different financing types could work.
Did you get any undertakings about those ranges of sources of finance when you were in Japan and Hong Kong?
No, wasn't seeking any. What we do know is there's plenty of finance around if you've got a transaction that makes sense to people. And as I said, in New Zealand, we've had, particularly in our councils, there's really been very little of that sort of activity. There's been some of it in central government, but you know, this isn't just about state highways. This is about, you know, local roads and overlaps of NZTA and the local council roads and so on. So it's a lot more complex, and it will take a bit of time to shake down into transactions which are suitable.
Will there be a need for any legislation or review of legislation, in particular the Auckland Council?
Oh, there might well in the long run. I think if they're going to take alternative financing seriously, and this is a council that's got fairly high debt levels. Well, it's got fairly rigid debt levels, are actually quite low, but it's got a debt ceiling, and to finance the infrastructure one way or another between central and local government, it needs to be financed. In the long run, you want growth paying for growth, and if as a result of the discussion there's need for legislative change, well then of course we would do it. I think people would like to see, like to see solutions coming through the pipeline that are relevant to the kind of issues they see with transport and housing in our growing cities.
Would you like to see that happening before the election?
Oh no, certainly not before the election. Just simply, there simply isn't time, and these things are pretty complicated, particularly the first time you're doing them.